Hello, I am back at it again. It's been a while since I've been on, been traveling, doing a lot of things. Gosh, it may have even been about 5 months. I spent about 2 months out of state. I run quite a bit, so I've been out running and doing races. And when you get up around 60 years old, that's something you have to do to keep in shape. My doctor told me, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, your blood sugar's high, you're obese. No ranger wants to hear that. So started exercising, lost about 15, 20 pounds, and everything seems to be back in line. But enough about me. What I've came here to talk about today is the OG-107 uniform. And I've even mentioned it in a few other of my videos, but every time I go online and I read a listing where somebody has put the OG-107, and I see all the mistakes, see crazy prices, personally, it irks me because I was in the military for 22 years and in the Army, infantryman, ranger, paratrooper, scout sniper, all that kind of thing, with 2 combat tours. So, and one of my many jobs while I was in, additional duties, sergeants get additional duties, all kinds of them, was unit historian. And that's not even an official position. That's just because my unit, this one particular unit that I was in, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and part of the 82nd, had such a long, rich history, and we had our own little internal battalion museum. I was given the additional duty to be the keeper of the artifacts and learn about the military or unit history, and that's how I started. And of course, with 2+ combat tours and us bringing back artifacts and things from those. That was one of my many responsibilities. But anyway, to kind of get back on topic, there's a wide range of values of the OG-107. Besides the fact that there's 3 different types, which I'll be talking about today, and the reason that I'm bringing this up is I typically see a listing for the OG-107 and people have it at 80, 90, 100 bucks. And the uniform is a small size, paint splatters, all ripped up, collar ripped out, no patches, or the patches are in some weird configuration that really don't belong. You can tell it's fake right away, or I can. And they're asking some, stupid amount of money for them, when really, if it's in really poor condition and it doesn't have the correct patches or no patches at all, and it's a really small size, it's only worth about 20, 30 bucks at the most. Now, if you find the piece at the bins, or you find a piece at a rag house or yard sale, and you pay $1 or $2 or $3 or $5, whatever, then selling it at $20, $30, you're going to make some decent money on it, and that's cool. But if you get a OG-107 and you identify it correctly, and all the patches are correct, it's in a great condition, medium, large, extra large, which is almost unheard of for an XL. Especially if it's ID'd and it has the name, one with all the correct patches on it, a combat patch, unit patch, special skills in, rank, everything that's supposed to be on the uniform, and it's correct, and the patches are correct. You're talking, especially if they're colored patches, because they just, as opposed to subdued, they just really stand out. You can ask $125, $130, $150 and expect to get that for a good uniform of that nature, which is something that I particularly focus on when purchasing the OG-107. Now, there's this misconception that I've seen between an ID'd uniform and a named uniform. Just because a uniform is named, in other words, it has the name tag still on it, doesn't necessarily mean that the uniform is worth a bunch of money because it's named. That doesn't mean anything. It could be named Smith. There could be 1,000 Smiths that went to Vietnam or what have you. That doesn't really give it added extra value. Now, ID'd is something different, and people that list, they kind of get these terms mixed up. A uniform that is ID'd is, not only is it named, obviously, but you have some documentation that goes with the uniform. You have some pictures, maybe some orders, unit award, or not unit award, but award to that person. Some kind of documentation that pedigrees the uniform that goes with it. That is an ID'd or identified uniform to the actual person that wore it, and that could be worth considerably more. You know, you sell it as a package. Now, does that mean it's worth, you know, something like $300, $400, $500? Not necessarily. I mean, if the person, and not to disrespect anybody's service, but if the person was, like, say, a truck driver or like I said, not to disrespect anybody's service at all, but understand when we're talking values of reselling something, if it really depends on what the person did while they were in. And I'm going to take a drink of water here. But if the person that the uniform is ID'd to, and you'll understand what I mean, was in some great battle like Hamburger Hill or the Ashaw Valley, and they were up on the front lines actually fighting with the enemy. They were, you know, infantry, grunts, rangers, special forces, SEALs, what have you, and they you know, survived some type of battle and were awarded, you know, the Distinguished Flying Cross or whatever, Purple Hearts. That type of an ID to a person would be worth considerably more money than, let's just say, to somebody who went over and served and did their time and got awarded their, you know, combat patch from because they were in combat with that unit and then they came back. So it really depends on the pedigree, how it's ID'd, and like I said, the only reason I bring that up is because excuse me, some people think that named gives the uniform some huge value, but it doesn't. It doesn't really mean much of anything. If it's named and then subsequently ID'd to a person, it's going to give it more value because they're supporting documents and it's pedigree to an event usually or service. And if it's ID'd to somebody who was in a significant battle and got significant awards, usually special operations or paratroopers or things of that nature, it's going to be worth considerably more, especially if it's like a general's uniform or colonel's uniform or sergeant major's uniform, something of that nature. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of touch on that before I get into the three types of OG, olive green, shade 107 uniforms. But what I've done is I've bookended the uniforms that kind of give you an understanding of what came before and what came after. So, to start, let's get into the HBT. So this came before the OG-107s. The HBT, or what we call herringbone twill uniform, was first issued to the military in 1946 and was discontinued in 1952. So 46 to 52. And I have an example. Out of my own collection, not only out of my own collection, everything that I have in my collection is for sale. So it's all listed, it's all for sale. Very rarely do I not sell something. Now, if it's something I really, really like, I'm gonna list it at the top end of the values. Not 5 times value, but at the top end of whatever the market is bearing at the time. But anyway, so this is a herringbone twill. Like I said, 1946 and 1952, excuse me. Now, there are 3 different types or 3 different issues, 3 different phases, whatever, of the herringbone twill, and I'm not going to go into those details. I'll leave that for another video. But so before the OG-107, we had the herringbone twill. This is the Army's and Air Force's version of the herringbone twill. You can see the 13-star metal buttons. Okay, 13 stars, 13 original colonies, and that herringbone twill type. This was more often worn in the Pacific theater than the European theater, even though it was worn in the European theater sometimes. Excuse me. More often than not, it was a Pacific theater worn uniform because it was lighter weight and really made more for hot weather climates. Now, the Marine Corps had a different button that actually said United States Marine Corps on it. They were all metal, but that is your herringbone twill. So, which brings us to the Type 1 OG-107. Now, how do you identify the Type 1? The easiest is by the pockets. On this, you see that not the very top button, but the second to the top button is aligned with the pockets. The pocket flaps are straight. They're squared off on the corners. Okay? There are 6 buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down, counting that top button. Right? Now, the Type 1 also had no buttons on the cuffs. It's just a straight cuff. Another strange feature is that the seam on the sleeve didn't go down the bottom of the sleeve. It went at a kind of a weird place, kind of about middle to middle top of the sleeve. There you go. You can see that seam. So it's in a really strange area. But the reason why they switched to a Type 2 is because when this top button was open, it left a big wide gap. And back then they wore white t-shirts, which was kind of strange, in my estimation, underneath, as opposed to the OD green or the brown. And that could be seen, that big white t-shirt and this big white gap. It could be seen from, heck, a long ways away, and you don't want a sniper looking at you with a big white patch right there. So they modified the uniform. The Type 1 went from 1952 to about 1963. So, excuse me, for about 9 years or so. Then they modified it to the Type 2 OG-107. The Type 2 OG-107, they moved the buttons up to prevent that big wide gap, and they went to 5 buttons. So counting the top button, there's 5 buttons. The pocket flaps have been clipped on the corners. They added a little, there we go, a pocket for your pen or pencil. And on the back, they have these 2 funky pleats up towards the shoulders. They actually put the seam on the bottom of the sleeve now. So it's lined up, so it's on the bottom. There's still no buttons on the cuffs. They're still straight across with no buttons. But what happened, and this was in 1963, the year of my birth, by the way, but it actually left a big, because they moved the buttons up and then went from 6 to 5 buttons, they left this big gap underneath here. Especially if you're wearing a white t-shirt or what have you, this just kind of flaps open out in the field, and it just didn't look like it should look. So within a year, they went to the Type 3. Here's a Type 3. They went back to 6 buttons, so they fixed the problem of this big gap at the top and this big gap at the bottom. The pocket flaps, are more chevron on the flap, and then in the bottom of the pocket, it's chevron pointed, right? They finally added the buttons to the sleeve cuffs. They kept the seam on the sleeve, on the bottom of it, as opposed to like some weird place in the middle. And then they took those silly pleats out that served no real purpose, like you wanted something that was so fitted when you're out in combat. And then they kept, of course, they kept the little pocket for your pen or pencil, which wasn't on the Type 1 to begin with. More often it was for your spoon to use and eat your rations. But I've seen all kinds of things in pictures. Now, so 1964 to 1975. In 1975, in my opinion, they came out with the ugliest green uniform. That was the OG-507. Now, the OG-507 is poly cotton blend. It's supposed to be permanent press, non-iron. There's nothing in the military that's non-iron, even though they tell you that. We called it the pickle suit. And when I first went into the military, this is what I was issued. I went in 1980, and I was in the reserves for 2 years, and this was our uniform. Hated it, thought it was hideous. So we had this from 1975 to 1982, and then finally, in 1982, I had changed from the reserves into active duty, and went to my first duty station overseas, active duty as a grunt, paratrooper, ranger, all that kind of thing. And then they changed to what we call the BDU, or battle dress uniform, in the I forget what they call this camouflage pattern off the top of my head, but forest or something or other. I don't know. Can't remember at this time. I'm getting old. But anyway, that's the uniform rundown. That should help you with identifying your OG-107s. There could be a great, like I said, a great range in values. Typically, if it's all chewed up, doesn't have the patches on it, it's a poor size. If you get it for cheap, it's only worth 20, 30 bucks. It has all the patches on it that are supposed to be there. They're in the right place. Someone just did put some weird patches on there to make it look good. And it's in a good size, and it's in great condition. You know, typically 60, 70 bucks. If it has, you know, the colored patches, it has a combat patch, usually infantry, with a combat infantryman's badge and some paratrooper wings. You could raise the value up to 125, 130. The name tag, if it's named, that doesn't really mean anything. Some people take their name tags off for whatever reason. Now, if it's ID to a specific person, just to recap, and it has all the supporting documents to be sold with it as a package, we're talking about something that is ID'd, and that could be worth considerably more, 150, somewhere around in there. If that person had some type of significant history, fought in some, you know, battles like the Ashaw Valley or Hamburger Hill or whatever, and especially if they were special forces, or they were, you know, a colonel or a general, or a sergeant major or something of that nature, and with all the supporting documents, well, you could pretty much name your price. It's whatever the market's bearing at the time. That if that person's, you know, obviously famous enough, it could be worth thousands. But anyway, that is the OG-107. So again, the OG-107, 1952 to 1975, consisting of three different types. Hopefully that helps you in IDing the type of uniform, gives you some tips for valuing it correctly, and helps you as a collector. And we'll see you on the next video, and I will probably maybe talk about the three different types of HBTs, or herringbone twills, because there is three different types, three different issues, and maybe even go into field jackets. There's basically four, 1941, 1943, 1955, I think it is, and 1964, or maybe 51 and 64, which I have all four types in my collection, in my inventory. But we will talk to you again soon. Hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and leave all the comments you want, and I'll try to answer every single thing that somebody puts in the comments, any questions or what have you. Questions, comments, snide remarks, they're all welcome. And we'll see you later on the next video.